have that microphone just in case. Good, thank you. Thank you. What have I forgotten? You know, I think Karen, you of course, and others would know Donnell, right? And something Donnell told me one time is that you assign the busiest person something you want to have get done. Now, I didn't assign this, but you took it upon yourself, and it's wonderful that you did. And thank you, Andy, for covering this spot last week. And Cher for taking up this big challenge of operating the tech department, the tech station, and you're doing a great job of it. Both of you, all of you, thank you. So good to have you here this morning. Yes, I said we would talk about all these things, so we'll start with hope. I see these candles illuminating a metaphor for life for us in this Advent season. Just as the first week begins with hope, the second week builds on that to achieve peace. And that's what these candles, what you could keep in mind with these candles. It's the idea that we build on hope. It starts there. I mean, you don't get to joy and all of these other things and peace without hope, do you? I think hope is a really, really essential basis element of these things. So we move from last week's hope to peace. We need the light of hope and peace. When our heart is dark and hopeless, you can have no prevailing peace. Am I right? When you have darkness and your heart is hopeless, you have no prevailing peace. Do you know anyone like that? Take a moment to lift them up. If you know someone like that, and I think about how the Lectio 365, when we do that, you go through a portion and then there's a pause for prayer and time to absorb that. And oftentimes it's set the stage for us to think of someone and lift them up. Lift them up to the Prince of Peace. Well, does this hit too close to home, this idea of darkness in your heart and the absence of peace? Maybe that person is you. And you have my permission to lift yourself up. Oftentimes when I'm doing the Lectio and it asks for lifting someone up, so often it's my oldest son. Lifting him up because I'm reading and hearing what he needs but resists. And as I'm doing that, it just rolls into, and that's a Me Too prayer. You know what I'm saying? It's not just him. He's modeled after me. He's maybe in a slightly earlier stage, but nevertheless, I give you permission to lift yourself up in prayer. And maybe that just feels like, oh, I couldn't do that. But yes, you should. It may be that nobody else is. So when we think of Christmas, we have the three wise men of Christmas. They're a real common theme. We see them on Christmas cards and all kinds of things. And even though they're typically misplaced because they appear in the manger, the fact is that they arrived perhaps a couple of years later when Jesus was already a toddler, no longer an infant. That's the way I picture it. It took a long time to come from to see the star, to figure the star out, to come from Persia, and I don't think it was just three. It names, or gives the idea that there's three, but there was no doubt a whole caravan to make sure that they had safe passage. But what about this? What about the three wise women of Christmas? That's what I want to look at today. That's what we're going to look at today. I heard of a woman who was in intensive care with a serious problem in need of a diagnosis. Now that happens between the doctors and the technicians and the people who do the scans and figure things out. And what they came to when they called the family back for was to say that the woman needed a brain transplant. Have you ever heard of one of those? Well, this is the way the story goes. This is the way I heard it. She needed a brain transplant, and the people were aghast. They hadn't heard of it either, and they were concerned, of course, about her survival. And the doctor says, you have options. There are some options. Okay, you have some options. You can have either a male brain transplanted into her or a female brain. Well, they notice from what he shows them that the female brain is much smaller than the male brain. And after they get over their initial shock of having to have a brain transplant at all, and notice the difference in the size of the brain, they ask, how much will this cost? $5,000 for the male brain, $200 for the female brain. Well, why? Why so much more for the male brain and so little for the female brain? And they say, well, the male brain is only slightly used. The female brain has a lot of hours on it. Hey, we better pray and start over. So, Lord, even though it's repetitive to pray again, we can never pray too much. And I ask you, God, to bring the fellowship vibe of laughter and seriousness and just the presence of your people together. Bring us together fully this day. And I ask that in Jesus' name. Amen. So we're going to look at the 3 wise women of Christmas, and in your handout you see this, that there's 5 things we all need. And this is going to give you a space to write in so that you can follow along. No, that actually I think is going to come later, but look at them. You can circle it. 5 things we all need. We need hope. Yeah? Don't you need hope? And don't you long for peace? When you look around you, there seems to be a real absence of peace on the broad scale, and I'm glad you addressed that with Ukraine this morning, and it's wonderful that you have a friend up close and personal to the problem involved, being part of the solution. It's wonderful. So there's a lack of peace everywhere you look and listen, and no less so with ourselves because it affects us, and we anticipate things to come that are certainly far from peaceful in the way we interpret it. See, we interpret what we see in the way of circumstances as being peace stealers, only if you don't trust God, right? There's the but God factor. But if you trust God, you can hold on to a hope. You can anchor hope in your heart. He says, when Jesus explains things that we will see in the end times, the disciples ask him when, and he doesn't really go to that. He says, you will see all of these conditions, and one of those being wars and rumors of wars. And then he says, but these are just the beginning of birth pains. When a woman is in birth pain, she has a high hope, huh? It may not be peaceful at the moment, but there is a peace anticipated, resting on that hope of this child being born. And I think we would do well to think in kingdom terms that the kingdom is being born amidst these birth pains of the absence of peace. When we see the world going to hell in a handbasket, we can look forward, we can have faith, we can trust God. That Jesus said, this is what you will see, and this is how it will be. But it's not the end of the story. So let's put our own brains to work here now. 5 things we all need. We need hope, we need peace, and we need wisdom and faith. We need that wisdom to put our faith to work, and we need the basis of faith to be working in us. Faith to experience them in these things God is doing in His timing. Timing is central to all of this, and we need to yield there because we want things to move at a whole different pace. So now, here's the first thing you'd write in. Peace. Peace. You all know how to spell that, right? Peace. Peace amidst trials and setbacks rests on hope, held firmly in the heart. That could serve us all well, could it not? These are radical changes if you are a warrior. Are there any warriors here amongst us? These are radical. To lock these things into your heart, to have these things, to see that there is peace amidst trials and setbacks. When you hold hope firmly in your heart. So we're going to look at the first of three women today that illustrate that. Today we're going to only focus on one of those, and that's Elizabeth. But what about you? Are you experiencing any obstacles to a deep and profound peace? Let's just be honest. When I ask myself that question, I might feel okay. I'm all right. But there are things that are constantly marinating in my brain that are unresolved. That, depending on how they are resolved and depending on what's required of me and trusting mostly in what God's going to do, yeah, I can say there's a lack of peace. If you want that kind of peace, then let God help you find a hope, promise. Find a promise in His Word that gives you hope. And then hold on to it. Post it on a mirror. Memorize it. Put it on your refrigerator. Call it to mind often. Jeremiah speaks of this, and it's a wonderful verse. I love it. It's Jeremiah 29:11. He says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you." You worried about finances? He has plans to prosper you. And not just in terms of finances, those and beyond. I have plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future, which would, of course, include peace. Now, another pastor drew it to my attention because he had been working through the book of Jeremiah, and he says, when this was written? When this message was delivered to the people through Jeremiah the prophet from God's mouth and heart, it was when they were in Babylonian captivity. This wasn't when things were okay and it was just a bad day. No, they were in Babylonian captivity for 70 years. Their city had been destroyed, people had been killed. It was a siege by the Babylonians that brought this about. But you know what? That was all part of God's plan. He raised up Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, which were not righteous people, to punish Israel for its lack of obedience, for its lack of concern, for its lack of faithful following of God. And so God uses these things, He uses these birth pains, things we see, for our benefit. And one of them I just described so that we can look forward and hold on to something much bigger, something far beyond the circumstances that we see. Got another one for you to write in. I love this. A setback is just the setup for a comeback. I'm not sure who to credit that for. Probably Rick Warren. He is a master of phraseology, of putting things together that can stick in your mind easily. A setback is just the setup for a comeback. You have to hold on to this idea. You have to hold on to something here today. Grab hold of something and let it hook you and capture you. James speaks to this. He says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. The setback. He's saying it's a setup. Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Now, as I talk about this, and based on the title of the message and the larger subject of the message, these are just all components of what we will see in these wise women of Christmas, and particularly today in the life of Elizabeth, and in her life. When I say her life, the way she lived her life. Number 3, wisdom brings warmth to the heart and peace to the soul. I take that from Proverbs 2:10, where it says, wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will delight your soul. The knowledge of God, and the peace he brings, and the hope he responds to and calls for. There's another verse. It's 1 Kings 3:28. When the people of Israel heard about King Solomon's decision, they respected him very much. They saw he had wisdom from God to make the right decisions. Can you place that? Does the picture cue you up on that? It's a fascinating story. 2 women come to him, and one of them claims that the baby is hers, and the other says, no, it's my baby, because the baby of one of them had passed away, had died. No, it's my baby. It's not your baby, it's my baby. And so Solomon, in his wisdom, says, well, I got a plan. You know what it is? I'm going to cut that baby in half and give each of you half. Well, that kind of brought things to light to where the real mother says, no, that won't do. Let that woman have my baby. Well, they solved it themselves. But he had the wisdom, and when the people saw that, he had that kind of wisdom from God, and he made right decisions. And so they all heard about it, and they respected him very much. Let's look at some of the problems that these ladies faced, and I'll include all of them here, because life presents us with peace-stealing obstacles. I believe that's going to show up later, that require wisdom to overcome. Elizabeth faced a major disappointment. She's old and childless. Mary faced a major change that came with problems. She's pregnant and yet single. Anna faced major loss. She's 84 and had been widowed after 7 years of marriage. So they all had peace-stealing obstacles to overcome. We're done with that, except to say this: wise decisions earn the respect of the people you serve. Solomon was serving the people. He was acting as a judge between 2 people that had conflict, and there was an unrighteous act going on, and he knew how to judge rightly and solve that problem. Let the people solve it for themselves. When the people of Israel heard about King Solomon's decision, they respected him very much. And so we have 2 people. I'm going to just introduce these. 2 of the first 3 people the Christians remember at Christmas. These are especially the Virgin Mary. They're remembered, though, for their humility, devotions, faith, and patience. They've earned the respect that they've received throughout the ages. And most of all, Mary. Am I right? Isn't that the one woman that we really focus on at Christmas time? So much has been said and written about her. But we will pick Mary up not next weekend, but the weekend after. So I'll break this into 3 messages. Today, Elizabeth. Next weekend, Jews for Jesus. They asked me early in the year if there's an opportunity that fits in our calendar for them to come and speak here. We support Jews for Jesus. They're doing a very, very impactful and vital ministry around the world. And the subject will be Hanukkah. It's that time of year right now in the Jewish calendar, and we'll see the connection between the menorah candle and Hanukkah. And we'll also see, are you going to do this for me? No? Oh, come on. Do something. Okay. What we get to do here is to refresh our thinking on the fact that we have Judeo-Christian roots. So often when I read the Bible, I see that God is speaking to Israel. And I'm thinking, I don't know if my people can relate to that. I'm not sure how well I relate to that, but we are of Judeo-Christian roots. And how did that happen? We've been grafted in. Grafted into the promises of God. They weren't for us initially. We were outsiders. We were enemies of God. We were Gentiles. We were outside of the covenants of God, but we've been grafted in. And so we need to remember we have Judeo-Christian roots and not distance ourselves from what the Jews for Jesus ministry is doing, which is helping to reconcile the early people that were not to help reconcile the Jews and the Gentiles together. I'll say it in the simplest terms. So I would like to ask you this. Would you, knowing this, I hope you'll all be here, would you please include something in the way of a love offering when you're here? I don't really want to take two offerings, but the speaker comes from San Francisco or somewhere up there in the Bay Area to speak to us. A big commitment. Nancy and I have met Susan Perlman 35 years ago at a Jews for Jesus in-gathering. We were brand new believers. And she's speaking to us today. So we have aged together, but she's been with Jews for Jesus for many, many years. And so, back to where we are. The last person in this is Anna, a prophetess of God. And we'll look at her on the 29th after Christmas. She's the least recognized of the wise women of Christmas. She was a prophetess of God. Each of these wise women, by God's design, had a man in their life. And here we see Elizabeth with Zechariah. Both Elizabeth and Zechariah were used mightily by God to prepare the way for what Christmas is all about, the birth of Christ, the arrival of the Messiah, Emmanuel. Here we see Zechariah. It's with Zechariah that Luke's contribution to the harmonized Christian story begins. Being a priest of God was an honored Levitical birthright. You had to be in the line of Aaron. It was a priest's responsibility to live a righteous life. As a descendant of Aaron and a devout priest, Zechariah met all the criterion. I want to, you know what? I'd like to, maybe I won't. Oh, there we go. I'd like to read just as quickly as possible through the passage that we're going to look at today. It's Luke 1:5 through 25. In the time of King Herod of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah, who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah, and his wife Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron. Have you had a chance to get on board here with me? You are looking at your phones or Bibles. Both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. But they were childless because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, and they were both very old. Once when Zechariah's division was on duty and he was serving as priest before God, he was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And when the time for the burning of incense came, all the assembled worshipers were praying outside. Then an angel at the right side of the altar of incense, oh, I missed something. Then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was startled and was gripped with fear. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to call him John. He will be a joy and delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He is never to take wine or other fermented drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before he is born. He will bring back many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God, and he will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah to turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." Zechariah asked the angel, "How can I be sure of this? I am old, and my wife is well along in years." The angel said to him, "I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you and to tell you the good news. And now you will be silent and not able to speak until the day this happens, because you did not believe my words, which will come true at the appointed time." Meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah and wondering why he stayed so long in the temple. When he came out, he could not speak to them. They realized he'd seen a vision in the temple, for he kept making signs to them but remained unable to speak. When his time of service was completed, he returned home, and after this, his wife Elizabeth became pregnant, and for 5 months remained in seclusion. "The Lord has done this for me," she said. "In these days he has shown his favor and taken away my disgrace among the people." That's what we're going to look at today. It's a wonderful story, and maybe we don't visit it often enough, but we're going to have a deeper look at it today. Zechariah is the husband of Elizabeth. He's a priest of God. It begins like this. I've read it to you. In the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. His wife Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron. Both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blameless. Luke gives us a clear historical time reference. In the time of King Herod of Judea, there was a priest. We're going to be talking about Zechariah for much of this passage. So we get a time frame and we get a focus on who we're going to be looking at, who this story develops around, and we'll see something about the character of the two people, Elizabeth and Zechariah, and the problem that they faced. Both of them were righteous in the sight of God, but they were childless because Elizabeth was not able to conceive. This is the obstacle they faced. This is the difficulty that they've lived with. There's so much to it. At the end, she says, "He has removed my shame from among the people." They were righteous and blameless in the sight of God. That didn't escape God's eyes. It doesn't escape his eyes when we live that way. I wonder if such a notation will be alongside of my picture or bio. He was righteous and blameless in the sight of God. Right now I'm blamed for a lot of things. But maybe I have a little different standing with God. But you know what? I'm not always on my best behavior either. So I make no claims to this righteousness and blame and deserved blamelessness. I make no claims to a deserved righteous and blameless character in the sight of God. It's all him. It's all his grace. Number 5, if you write this in, life presents peace-stealing obstacles that call for wisdom to overcome. Yes, these people have had a problem. All these years they've been married. Life is like that. The hope of Elizabeth overcoming being old, barren, and childless sounds like a lost cause. When you're old, you're old. You don't get to set the clock back. And if she did, she's been barren all this time. But the wisdom of God holds the trump card even when we don't see it. we've been playing a game called Anaconda. And in cards, there's typically a trump card. And we've decided we'll call that a triumph card instead. But the wisdom of God holds the trump card even when we don't see it, and that's exactly what was needed to sustain the hope and peace that keeps this couple from despair. Life presents peace-stealing obstacles that call for wisdom to overcome. We're looking at these matters here. We're seeing them in the life of these women. I'll move past that slide because we've seen it. There's another one to write in here. Elizabeth would need righteous wisdom to overcome the temptation of major resentment and disappointment with God. Resentment? Would that be resentment toward God?
We don't have that one.
You don't have that one. Okay, well, you can write it in if you like. Well, she would need righteous wisdom to overcome the temptation to major resentment and disappointment with God. Now, I'm inclined to think her resentment wasn't towards God. It wouldn't fit her character of faith and hope and that elusive peace that's associated with it. I think her resentment would be, in a sense, just toward these peace-stealing obstacles of life. There could be a certain amount of resentment towards other women that she would see that had babies and families. Then she said she had shame among the people. You have something?
She actually shunned. I'm trying to remember if biblically she was actually shunned or put aside, or the women in her community did not connect with her because she had not borne a child.
Well, that would certainly be the tenor of the day. The Bible doesn't say it. We might overlap our biblical context. It was the culture of the day that if you didn't bear children, you were failing your husband. You were failing your highest calling to produce a family, and particularly boys, to strengthen the family for their work and for their standing in the community. I'm thinking that perhaps, well, I don't know, it was in my mind earlier, but is another one that's more clear in terms of the Bible saying that that was the situation. But we know that it is. We know that it's very much a fact. It doesn't say that in our reading about Elizabeth until the end where she talks about God delivering her from the shame of all the people. So if I didn't give this one to you, my numbers are probably all mixed up too. That should have been number 6. I want to pause and talk a little more about this resentment thing. We talked about maybe a resentment towards life in general. It may be a resentment towards other women, but there might have even been a measure of resentment towards her husband. You can write this one in wherever that fits numerically. Oh, it's all messed up, huh? Did I give you a place to write this in? Elizabeth chose to be, this is an easy one for you to write down. I think I've given you enough space. Go ahead and write it down. Elizabeth chose to be blameless, not bitter. We saw that she was righteous and blameless in the eyes of God, as was her husband. But she chose. It's a choice. It's a decision. Wisdom involves choices and decisions, and we have to decide between one and the other. She chose to be blameless, not bitter, while resentment was a temptation, seeing the young women all around her. And at the same time, disappointment with God must weigh heavily on her at times. She's just a human. I said that perhaps she's even, I'm not sure this is supposed to be here. Oh, here's where I'm going. She could have taken this attitude. The Lord has done this to me, she thought. She'd be thinking, all these years he's shown his favor to other women. But he has abandoned me to the shame of being barren and childless. That would be easy enough for a person to land there, wouldn't it? Poor me. This sucks. Well, that's not what she said at all. She chose to be blameless, not bitter. I want to look at the timing aspect, and to do that, we need to go back to where it all opens in the first, in verse 5. In the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. As Solomon says, there's a time for everything. This was the time. This establishes it in history, but there was a special time when this happened, and things were in a special order and arrangement. And so I think we can see three things to show us that this was the right time by God's design. One, it was in the time of Herod. Oppression was at its greatest. Herod was at his peak. And we know that he was quite insecure, as so many rulers are. And he would actually order the death of many children. That's the time this was. He was a paranoid king. Second happens at this time, we see it all in the first verse. In the time of King Herod, there was a priest named Zechariah. The second part of that is Zechariah was from the priestly division of Abijah. That had to be in place for God to do what he's doing here. The third thing is that he was chosen by lot. Let me read down here. Once when Zechariah's division was on duty and he was serving as priest before God, he was chosen by lot. This was a once-in-a-lifetime type of thing where he would be chosen by lot because he was from the right pedigree. And he was chosen by lot according to the custom of the priesthood to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. He's going into the Holy of Holies, the most holy place, to burn incense in a once-in-a-lifetime service. And when the time for the burning of incense came, all the assembled worshipers were praying outside. Isn't that interesting? While this thing is happening inside, the people can't go into the Holy of Holies. The priest doesn't even get to do that except but once a year, if I'm not mistaken. And then he has to go in with a rope tied around and a bell in case he gets struck dead. That's the way we understand this, right? Is that just tradition or is that biblical? I'm not sure. But that's kind of the picture here. This was a very special thing. And when that time came, all the assembled worshipers were praying outside. I'm thinking, that's very significant. Are we that devoted ourselves? I think not. I think not. Well, this is all part of God's timing to launch the Christmas story. It made me think of the word orthodoxy. There's a certain orthodoxy. And in our Bible study, we were looking at different things in a video, and a comment was made that the Nicene Creed was dogma. And I felt like, no, I want to defend the Nicene Creed. It's not just a tradition and dogma. It's a certain amount of orthodoxy, and I think there's a certain orthodoxy here. They're doing the right, they know the right thing to do, and they are doing it. And so I looked it up. I was looking for a good quote on orthodoxy, and I only found bad quotes on orthodoxy. And I came across this word, you might know it, maybe not, orthopraxy. You see the word in the Greek, the word there is practice. It's a correctness or orthodoxy of action or practice. It's not just the knowledge, it's not just the theology, it's not just tradition, it's putting the right thing into practice. And so orthodoxy is the doctrine, the generally accepted beliefs of society at a particular time. And the Bible teaches this is what I've found on it, that correct doctrine, orthodoxy, comes before and informs correct behavior, orthopraxy. Without correct beliefs, we cannot have truly correct behavior. If we truly have correct beliefs, our behavior should align with those, huh? So often, Jesus was critical of the Pharisees who specialized in maintaining orthodoxy, largely of tradition by keeping all the rules, but not striving to live to the intent of the law, the spirit of the law. And Jesus called them what? Whitewashed tombs. You look pretty good, but you know what? You're full of dead men's bones. You're hypocrites. You've got the orthodoxy, but there's no orthopraxy. You don't practice what you preach. Well, this is something for us to keep in mind too, because this is not only what God sees, it's what the outside world sees of us. And this is why we Christians can be so easily dismissed. We continue then. Then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was startled and was gripped with fear. He's full of fear, gripped with fear. He's scared spitless by this frighteningly unfamiliar messenger. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to call him John." Well, that's good news if that ever happens to you. If an angel ever appears to you and you're gripped with fear, trust that it's happening because he's got some really, really good news for you. And it's common to be gripped with fear in that setting. And so he's told, "Do not be afraid, Zech, your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear a son. And you are to call him John." So laying out some things. So Zech, I come in peace with good news. Peace be with you. Yours and Elizabeth's hope-filled, prevailing prayers have been heard by God. I get the real sense that these have been prevailing prayers all their lifetime. Do you have things that you need to prevail in prayer over and with that just seem, well, they come up once in a while, but nothing happens, and so, we think, okay, well, I could pray for that again, but I'm not expecting much. How is it that a priest can stand there in the Holy of Holies serving before the Lord and be surprised when he gets a divine message from a divine messenger speaking for God and not believe it? Boy, if it happens in his condition, how much more so in ours? Have you ever prayed for something or someone, but you don't really expect much? A classmate, I was told, I mentioned this recently, has stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and it's metastasized in other parts of her body. There is no cure for it, but they can subdue it somewhat. Well, the writing is on the wall, is it not? Yeah. But it doesn't keep me from praying for her. I just only expect to hear that she passed away soon. So our prayers need to be fitting to the situation. I pray that she has the kind of help that will give her a pain-free path. Hey, we all die. Yeah, I accept that about life. Many of us will get terrible diseases. Some of us will need joint replacements. It's just part of life. Some of us should have a brain replacement. Some of us will be miraculously healed. If you have that hope and faith, that's what we're talking about here. It's amazing, though, that in all the years of praying, that it would have continued into their very, very old age. They didn't take the route that Sarah and Abraham took. Well, let me make this happen by myself. Okay, here's what we'll do. I don't like it, but we can do it. They didn't take that approach. But the angel said to him, do not be afraid, Zechariah. We're repeating this. Your wife Elizabeth will bear a son. Zechariah is not expecting that kind of good news from them because he says, you know what, let's pass on what he says and let me give you another number 6. The gap between God has heard your prayer and God answers your prayer is called God time. There's a term we can apply to it. You pray this and you're looking for it to happen, and in their case, praying and praying and praying late into life. Beyond the time where you could expect it to happen, but there's something called God time. It's that gap in between your prayer going out with expectation and God answering your prayer. We should know this. And in that gap, we are being prepared to witness a God-glorifying miracle. I think he has to get us ready for that. We have to be completely out of gas before he says, come on over here, I've got a 5-gallon can and it'll get you to the gas station where I'm going to fill you up. The next stop. Why after all these years when they're both so old, making love isn't even a thing anymore? There's a term for it. Hold on to that. It's called God time. It's important. But the angel said to him, do not be afraid, Zechariah. There's so many things we can't know or see in God time that God is preparing us for, taking us to what would seem like the end of our rope, where we would stop praying, we would stop hoping, we would stop believing, we would give up the peace that we hoped for. But he's preparing us. How much more so? How much more so the power of a miracle when you've been prepared for it? Because unbeknownst to Elizabeth, she was to become the mother of John the Baptizer. I've noticed that the terminology has changed somewhat. John the Baptizer, I've always grown up with John the Baptist. But I think the Pentecostals and the Catholics and the Presbyterians didn't like that. Wait a minute. Let's call him the baptizer. We can agree on that. There are so many things we can't know or see in God time that God is preparing us for. That's the case with her, unbeknownst to Elizabeth, because she doesn't even have the information yet. Faith is the evidence of things hoped for, the certainty of things unseen. That so fits this situation. The angel goes on to say, he will be a joy and delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord. Well, joy already abounds. The child could be born handicapped. It wouldn't make any difference. Wouldn't matter. Their child would be born, that's the important part, and the child would be spirit-filled from his birth, even while in his mother's womb. How does that fit with your theology? Spirit-filled before Pentecost. Spirit-empowered to carry out an amazing mission assigned to him. It's a prophetic mission that is referenced in Isaiah, that he would go and prepare a way for the Lord, a people prepared for the Lord. There's a caveat though. Since he'll already be filled with the Holy Spirit, there's no room for any other spirits, and particularly fermented spirits. There's no room for fermented spirits, because he was to be endued with the Holy Spirit all of his life. I wonder if that might be part of our problem for being in a somewhat compromised position. He will bring back many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God, and he will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. There are certain passages I read, and I just wonder, well, what's the significance of that? What does that mean? Go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah. Well, what I found on that was that what Zechariah, as a priest of God, would know is that the son to be born would fit the Old Testament prophecy of Isaiah that called for exactly that, one who would go before the Messiah, before his arrival. Most of you will recall Johnny Carson, right? Who was his sidekick? Ed McMahon. I heard he was a raging alcoholic. I don't know if that's true or not. And what was his job? Here's Johnny. Huh?
Laugh at all the jokes.
Yeah, laugh at all the jokes. But his announcing job was, here's Johnny. So John the Baptist was, here's Jesus. Here's your Messiah. Zechariah asked the angel, how can I be sure of this? I'm an old man and my wife is well along in years. He didn't say she was old. She's just well along in years. I think his uncertainty here suggests the faith issue we saw. Faith is the evidence of things hoped for, the search of the certainty of things unseen, something of that nature. I think there's uncertainty. It suggests the faith issue we all have based on obstacles. Zechariah has identified himself as Gabriel, and the term for that means strength of God. He stands in the presence of God. He's there delivering good news, it says. There you go, Zech. Your unbelief is on full display. You got a small speaking part, but you blew it. So we're not going to be hearing from you for a long while. The angel said to him, I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I've been sent to speak to you, to tell you this good news. And now, because of your statement, how can I be sure of this? I'm an old man. My wife is well along in years. Perfectly rational thinking, is it not? How can I be sure of this? Mary asks a similar question, but she doesn't say, how can I be sure of this? She says, how will this happen? It's different. She is not reprimanded and made silent. But Zechariah is, because he did not believe in the words, which would come true at the appointed time. He's going to get a small speaking part that we've just seen, and a little more later, but not much. Meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah and wondering why he stayed so long in the temple. When he came out, he could not speak to them. They realized he had seen a vision in the temple, for he kept making signs to them, but remained unable to speak. I wonder if Elizabeth was among those that were praying outside. It would seem like she would be, waiting for Zechariah's return. Doesn't say. When his time of service was completed, he returned home. I'm not sure that she was in there. We know that they lived, I think, in the hill country of Judea. I think they lived far from Jerusalem. So maybe she wouldn't have been there. Because it says when his time of service was completed, he returned home. And then after this, his wife Elizabeth became pregnant and for 5 months remained in seclusion. My curiosity is aroused with this idea, when his time of service was completed, he returned home. It turns out that this would be a week-long time of service for a priest who was called into this role of lighting the incense in the Holy of Holies. So, he's coming back, and this is probably the first time he has the opportunity to explain this to Elizabeth and then do his part in bringing it about. The Lord has done this for me, she said. I don't see verse 24. In these days he has shown his favor and taken away my disgrace among the people. This is the speaking part for Elizabeth. This is the close of what she has of this piece we're going through. There's verse 24. It's up there in the middle. This is the close of this segment that we're looking at today. But here's what she says. The Lord has done this for me. In these days he has shown his favor and taken away my disgrace among the people. The final thing for you to put in your handout, write in, is all these essential things for living with hope-filled peace are gifts from God. Our hope is a gift. Our peace is a gift. Our faith is a gift. These are all things that we can't do on our own. They come from God, and God sees what we're doing with them. We're, in a sense, stewards of all of these, more than just money. We're stewards of these gifts of God. So then, closing with this, what can we learn from Elizabeth, this wise woman of Christmas? What can we learn? It's not too difficult. 5 things we all need. There's 5 things. Hope, peace, and the wisdom and faith to experience them in God's timing. Recognizing that there's a gap, perhaps, between your prayers and the answer to that prayer. But in that meantime, in that gap time, we need hope. We need a hope that peace can build upon. And then it's going to take wisdom and applied faith to experience them in God's timing. And so there's a certain amount of yielding and surrender to do there also. It comes from God. It goes back to God. And we're going to have to let God choose the right time for it. I'll close here with a prayer and saying, Lord, I thank you that you have ministered to me. I pray, ministered to your people and given us a taste of Christmas, a sense of one of the very important and first players in the Christmas narrative that we see here today. And I ask God that we would keep Elizabeth in mind and the things we've seen about her. And many of the things we've seen about the other women will be similar. Really, in so many ways, they excel as the Proverbs 31 woman. And but we're going to visit each one of them and see them right where they are and the obstacles and situations they faced and have overcome. And so I pray, Lord, that we too would have their attitude when it comes to dealing with the situations that we face. Help us, Lord. Keep these things in mind. And I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. And that